Yeah, cool.
how to be.
So maybe we are the ones that are gonna make it tonight. So let's go into and feel free to break in with questions and discussions as as I said in the invite, Visual Studio 2022. Well, that's it's a new there's lots of new stuff under the hood. Maybe one of the major points that they've done is it's 64-bit. So that will definitely help us because sometimes now when we have really large models and we have had them open multiple days, for some reason caching and logging etc. has eaten up the 2 gigabytes of memory and we need to restart. So I guess the 64-bit will end that need as long as you have more memory on your computer. So that's one thing. But let's fire it up. To have a discussion. So since the strategy to do plugins has changed, hasn't really changed, but all the supporting assemblies are different. And as Microsoft do when they make things new and better, they change names and change what the containers, this is now in that assembly and this other thing is now in another assembly, and there's lots of work to try to find everything and make it work as it did. And what has definitely changed now is backward compatibility. It's no way that we can do one build to have that working in both VS 2017, 2019 and 2022. There we must have a different build for 2022 and everything. Hopefully that will be good enough for 2024 as well, so we don't have to spend too much time in this constant updating of stuff that really isn't that meaningful for us. But once we have passed through that, what we have had is to put MDriven as a separate install and installer, and that has been pros and cons with that. Mostly we did that for historic reasons. We started that way at some point and got stuck with it, and we have the installer for the standalone applications like the MDriven Designer, so it wasn't such a big deal to have it for the framework as well, even though during the years Visual Studio has more and more shifted to this format they call VSIX, V6, to install tools into Visual Studio, and those end up under extensions like this. So I'm just gonna fire up the project as it is now, so it's still a bit early days. Okay, I see that I must start it as administrator in order to let those things. Okay. Gonna run as administrator and kill this one. So what I'm doing now is starting the plugin that actually will simulate the install into another instance of Visual Studio 2022. And it's building. And this other instance then will act just as if the installer had been installed. So I'm going to start one of the projects here that I'm going to discuss a bit about going forward. And as you can see, there's lots of things happening in the background from when you start Visual Studio. So how this shows up is that we get installed and we have our own menu here, which brings up the about form, etc. So, and we end up in the extension list among the installed. So we're here, and this is where you could eventually uninstall. And how you will install MDriven framework is download the VSIX file and then double click on it, and then it will update the framework, and sort of similar process as it has been, but there's more possibilities with this VSIX format. And there's a lot of built-in designers that we must support then to have the same behavior as we have had before. One of them is to actually have the model display in a document form like this. So but we have a lot of challenges with the EcoSpace format, which is designers of their own. And why do we have challenges with that? Well, the modeler, the design surface, that's a designer for a document, so that's fine, we manage that. But the EcoSpace is a designer on a type, but on the EcoSpace type, which is a subclass to EcoSpace default EcoSpace. And that has become a hassle because what framework should we target? There's a mix of framework in the new Visual Studio 2022, more so than it was before. We have .NET 5, .NET 6, we have the old or existing framework 4.7 plus, we have .NET Standard 2.0, and we have .NET Standard 2.1. So .NET Standard 2.0 can be used by framework, but this one can't be used by this one. This one can be used by these two. And then of course from .NET Core, which they called it, .NET Core disappeared, and that's now totally replaced by .NET 5. And what makes it problematic with the designers is that since the designer must be written in a language which Visual Studio accepts plugins in, and Visual Studio is still written in framework, so the designer must run the framework. But if we have types that are done with .NET 5, it's not obvious that framework plugin can act on that type. And we do a lot of introspection from once we generate the code to understand what the model is in the design type when dealing with the different tools. So that's still something that we need to get a grip on, and possibly all the functionality will of course be available, but maybe the interfaces to the different tools will be more code-centric than design time-centric. And maybe that's not a problem, because if you think about what was in the EcoSpace Designer, it was things like generate database, etc. But all those things are sort of available in the tools within the modeler, because we have moved so much stuff into the MDriven Designer, which is basically this tool in a separate app. So we might end up with a few things looking a bit different when we're done with this. And also the templates. And the templates are what you get when you do like new project. And it would be nice if there were MDriven templates that you could instantiate to get the default. It's much easier to get started that way. And I use them all the time when I'm doing different test scenarios. But that has the same issue with the what we should put into the templates, what assemblies we should use, because there are all these frameworks to choose from. And since Visual Studio and .NET community has moved very much to NuGet to get valid current assemblies, we have two. So let's see if we can show something like that. If I from before, we have had the packages which start with eco, and those are actually the packages that was based on framework. And this was called Eco Core because that was the core of Eco, and then Microsoft came along and called it .NET Core, and the confusion just took off. So that's not really a good name any longer. And Eco is not a good name any longer because we're not MDriven. So we have introduced a new MDriven NuGet packages that are built on the .NET Standard 2.0 as far as possible, because 2.0 can still be used by framework 4.7. So that's the best standard to target. I'm not really sure why they messed with 2.1, because there's very little need to support 2.1. There is only a few things extra in that standard as I see it, and nothing that's really fits in. It's not really not anything we use currently. So these packages will then use .NET Standard. But the templates, what should they use? Well, preferably they should use these packages, so it would be easy to update the packages once you have gotten a template. But then the template format is so messed up that you can't really just point to NuGet to pull the packages. You have to include the packages within the template, and then the template sort of grows, and our whole installation grows, and that's probably not a good way to go. So maybe we should ditch the templates and go with Bitbucket, or have just the Git repository, because when you create a new project or decide to create a new project, it's really easy to connect to a Git server to pull projects. And maybe we should do example projects instead of the templates. That's what I'm thinking now anyway, to make then we could make it more detailed examples that are a bit more live, that are updated continuously. So that's where we are at this point. So there's still a few weeks until we will release something. But what will we be able to do extra when we are in 2022? Of course, we should be able to do everything as we did before, WinForms, VPF and MVC. But then Microsoft has introduced this new framework, which is it's a UI framework, much like what we have used in MDriven Turnkey. We used Angular JS to have a front-side framework to work with HTML and JavaScript. But Blazor is sort of a different approach, which makes things different and doesn't rely very much on JavaScript at all. And when we look at the architecture for Blazor server side, which is the most interesting or most practical for us, it's really architectural wise extremely close to MDriven Turnkey, such as the server, all the data resides on the server, and the server renders the pages, and the pages are streamed down to the client in a thin format, just doing the changes. It's slightly different done than what we did it with the Turnkey, because and these guys sort of stream pieces of the DOM, so they do not really separate between presentation and data in this streaming. They stream whatever is on the screen. And let's just start this simple project out which use a little bit of Blazor. Alright, maybe I need to kickstart my MDriven server to get it going. So I think this was on server slot 1. I'm going to start those. And I'm going to restart this one. So this is based on the default template for a Blazor project. I don't know if you have seen it. They usually have a counter which when you push the button it counts something and it fetches some data. What we have done here is to sort of simulate. We're not done with generating the full view model, but what happens when you enter data in a input control like this, there's nothing as long as you haven't left the control. But as soon as you leave the control, that data is streamed back to the server and applied on the different objects. And since that data was shown in different places, that propagates back to the client via a very thin update mechanism of this HTML DOM. So if we were to look at the page, it's really thin. Doesn't contain anything more really than just what's on the page. Very thin client to receive this data, which is, by the way, sent over signal R. So it's a WebSocket that sends the information back and forth. And if I were to check on the network, very little happens here, and I don't think I even see anything. If I do update here, it's sort of completely dead here because, well, the socket is open and we're not privy to see what's sent in the socket really. So and how we did the implementation of this, let's see. The Solution Explorer. And so basically we just took a view model and created a VM class from that view model by sending in an object that we got from this OCL. And once we had that, we can answer these question that, let's see if I can find it, where we do the rendering of the data. And let's see. Yeah, I'm search for it. See if I can find where we do this. Yeah, that's so. What happens when the client has signaled the server to there's something out of date is that this method gets called and returns a render fragment. So render fragment is some kind of markup that should be mixed into the old place down at the client door. So this goes on all the time. So if we set a breakpoint in here and write something new and then step away from it, we are now on the server. And of course, this kind of builder markup, we want to do a renderer that can handle this for everything in the view model, so that everything that you potentially would need to do with code like this, or with Razor markup, which is basically HTML with the mixed in code that is transpiled into this stuff and then compiled. But we want to do this in runtime in order to build the views based on the view model definition. But all in all, it looks fairly promising to provide model-driven tools based on the Blazor framework. And this is true to form. This is what we have said all the time, that sort of modernity comes and goes. There will always be new frameworks to render stuff. But the core gist of things, the important stuff on the business rules and what information you have and how you want to display it is, well, it will continue to be more or less exactly the same over time. And the plan to go forward is really to, of course, this Blazor server side. If we look 2 years ahead, maybe that sort of takes over from our turnkey solution that we have now, maybe. But the way to get there is to actually start doing some Blazor client side, because that we can then we can sort of build installed iOS and Android apps fully model driven. much easier than we can do now. Because also what's available in Visual Studio 2022 is the MAUI framework, which is a UI framework for which allows for different platforms. But what we see more and more is that they use the MAUI container and then put a web view on it and then do Blazor client side in that web view to get reuse of all the rendering that you have done with Blazor or with HTML on Android or on a iOS phone app. So that's probably the way we're gonna go first to smoke out all the problems with this technology before we start to tamper with our very robust and resilient turnkey solution. And there's really nothing wrong with the turnkey solution. It's just that if this is the future, it's much better to piggyback on having Microsoft own some of the hard stuff.
I was just thinking, what are the pros and cons of, I mean, this Blazor server is like a lower level streaming thing than we have built in turnkey. We stream data, they stream HTML.
Yeah.
Like almost like a terminal. If you go back way back, you had text terminals, and then you basically had graphic terminals in Unix and Linux and Windows with the RDP connections and all that, and now they're streaming HTML instead of other streamings. So and then of course you come to this like, well, if you lose the connection, it goes straight away. You can't do anything, which is not entirely true with turnkey today. I mean, you can still interact a little bit without having a server connection. You can't do much, but you can do some. And here it's even more restricted, and so it's kind of completely different take on it. Blazor client seems to me like as you said, the first step in maybe replacing AngularJS, which is losing support, although there's nothing wrong with it. It works well because new Angular seems a bit much, really. That's really a thick client plugged into TypeScript transpiled to JavaScript running in a browser. So it's like an unnecessarily thick client, I would argue, for a turnkey supported.
Yeah, and we are not after all the fancy stuff that Angular provides. We just want to bind data to UI controls efficiently. And that's a bit too much to ask for the native web, so we needed some kind of framework. And Angular was a good fit. They had this, very good, and then they grew and grew and grew and grew, and they still had it, but they sort of ate themselves to death.
Yeah, or yeah, but it's, yeah, you really wonder how this UI framework thing, because I was thinking just, if from the Apple perspective, they want to be in control. How is Apple handling this? When you pointed out that, what was it you said? You had MAUI that contained a web view that used Blazor client to make HTML appear, and I mean, Google is more pragmatic, but Apple is very like, you do it our way or you don't do it at all.
Yeah, so I don't know how they're gonna handle if there's lots of small application that only has a web view in them, and before they have said no to that type of application that only puts a web view that pulls in a page from the web. They say that this isn't a worthy application of the Apple platform, and you're not allowed. And I don't know, but if
are there security issues with that?
Apple do that sometimes, you have to go through the review process, and then you get rejected. And I think they say it doesn't bring any new value to the platform.
I'm just, thinking of, it will be interesting, but maybe a lot of effort to move forward in this rendering landscape, because there seems to be more tech takes on this than really user value.
Yeah.
You pick up an Apple
Yeah,
stick.
and Derek, what you mentioned before, that sometimes you need to be really, really close to the information to get speed in rendering, and something like this that has a network flow between changes will not be any good at that. And this will be good at things that are just as slow as a person. But things that are faster than a person, like movies and stuff that change continuously, and sort of probably won't be perfect, because now you need to send over lots of information that's going to update the screen, and then you want to be fully client side, and client side you can be with Blazor, because the same technology that runs on the server can also run in this web assembly. So even if you write the exact same code in C#, you can compile that into WebAssembly, so it does this DOM fixing on the client, but still it's DOM fixing, so it won't be any faster than the browser is. So being really quick on the browser is probably best to go sort of SVG to render stuff, or a canvas to render bits in a canvas. But then you're back that you probably want a framework that's aimed to push that to maintain that canvas for you, and then you're at WebGL to actually have a sort of a 3D model of your world that is projected down to the canvas. So there's not one tool that's going to fit everything, but we can be pretty sure there will be information in everything that's rendered. So it's a good thing that we can separate the information from the rendering engine.
Yeah, I do appreciate, though, from your perspective, trying to decide which technologies to back or adopt in a landscape that is pretty fluid at the moment, it would seem, is it's a tough decision from your perspective, because obviously each thing that you try, that you integrate into the system, it's great for us, but it's a lot of effort for you guys.
Yeah, we always want to see that we have a good, perfect use case for it, so that it will come into use quickly. Because if it isn't used, it will just sit there and rot, and things evolve, and then it doesn't work anymore. So it has to be used fairly quick to otherwise there will be no point to spend energy to make it work once, because next update from Microsoft and it doesn't work. So but we need to find a good robust middle ground to make things function.
But just to reiterate on the status of where you guys are at the moment, it's because I'm still using eco assemblies basically. I mean, I can't remember what build I'm on, but But the MDriven assemblies are out there, net standard 2.0 currently, and all fully usable. And that's what I should probably migrate to for my stuff, which is not an issue. That should be pretty straightforward. But this next iteration for when do you expect that to kind of be usable?
I guess we will have a Visual Studio 2022 before Christmas, so that it's the one that we start to use. And once we have it, we'll probably deprecate the support for Visual Studio 2017 anyway.
Yeah.
But 2017 and 2019 aren't that different, so it's not that much effort, but so that's sort of the timeline. It depends on what happens in between.
That's relatively soon, though, from my perspective. That's relatively soon. I'm not using 22 yet.
So these things from NuGet, you can use them from 19 as well. So
sure. I mean, I use stuff from NuGet all the time.
Yeah.
I just haven't really migrated to those MDriven assemblies yet. But I think I will do. Probably this weekend. Then you mentioned it.
Yeah, Thanksgiving. So, and what's sort of good with having the pulling the bits from NuGet is that we get a separation from the bits that you're gonna have in runtime from the bits that you have from MDriven that supports the MDriven designer. And before, with the install and the distributed assemblies that way, they were the same. This assemblies that supported our designer and the stuff that you had in runtime. So when you updated this to get an updated runtime, you had to update the designer, and well, it was that made it somewhat easier that it was only one packet of bits, so it will always stay the same. And this way maybe makes it harder. I don't know, but more flexible.
Yeah, you said, Derek, that that we are in, there's a lot of changes in now or in this time. I just wonder if it will ever, stabilize again, because I feel it's been just going at least more and more and more and more diverse, at least the last 15 years.
Yeah, but at the same time, if you look from afar, it's less diverse now than it was, isn't it? Everyone is.
You mean everyone in the browser?
Yeah, everything is in the browser.
Yeah.
And pushing to the browser. But of course, not everything is in the browser, but everyone relates to the browser somehow, and
Yeah, in my industry, there's a lot of software that is not web served, primarily because some of it's security, but not really. Certainly, that is the general trend of anything that really can be served on a web is getting there. There's a lot of apps with huge market share that are just really old, but banks use them and so on and so forth, and they are the inertia in those places is enormous, and so you just can't get them to move off of these sometimes these really old and clunky apps. But then the other main class of thing that's not going to can't move to web is the stuff that's the data decks could move to a browser served environment, but the actual processing has to be done locally just because of its simulation. You know, it's very heavy duty, CPU, GPU intensive simulation stuff.
But what's happening with the WebAssembly stuff is interesting because that sort of gives the hope that we can get the use of the client CPU much more. That we can do high-level languages and even access the GPU from the browser.
Yeah, no, that I mean, and that's the way. That I can foresee that definitely happening. Even with some of these apps that I'm describing, and lots of those apps, are migrating their math from the CPU to the GPU. It's just.
But this like game streaming that they are doing, I mean, that's also a thing, right? That you make terminals out of games even. So you have immense computational power at the client, and then I don't know what they send.
I think they did it the other way. They have very thin clients so that you could do a fantastic game on a simple phone, but then everything happened on the server, so it was very much terminal based.
Some of the apps that I'm thinking about have benefited hugely from game technology and GPU technology, but you're not visualizing game stuff. Of course, you're visualizing seismic, 3D seismic cubes and that kind of thing, where you're doing a lot of seismic interpretation or static subsurface reservoir simulation interpretation and stuff like that. And so, because so much of it is visual, interpreter, it's very GPU graphics intensive, and so the oil industry, gas industry really has benefited a lot from the gaming technology explosion. Interesting.
Cool. Yeah.
Very interesting.
So I wish I had Thanksgiving as well, but so I could finish this.
Yeah, well, I'll I'm sure I'll eat my fair share of turkey for all of you guys. So, and it's a shame we didn't have more participants. We even lost Heinrich, huh?
Yeah, he says that his Mac is crashing, and he calls it blue screening or green screening or something. I don't know what Mac do really, but apparently, when he runs Google Meet. When he runs Google Meet in his browser, the whole machine crashes, which is very odd because I didn't think Macs could do that.
They were immune.
Yeah, I still live in the world that Macs are made
a little
perfect.
bit better than the rest of us.
Drinking the Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
He gave up, he said.
All right. Okay.
Okay, guys. Well, I'm sorry it was just me on this side of it, but I appreciate it anyway, very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually hadn't heard this 2022 struggle that it was this big this time. So I think it's interesting. Even inside their own company, Hans hadn't told me about his struggles with this.
Does the Blazor, the introduction of the Blazor technology and what they're trying to do, is that good for you guys?
Yeah,
or
I would say it's
on the toes of your business model.
It's good because it proves the point that we have said that of course, the framework that you pushed last year and said it would be never be replaced because it was the best ever is now replaced. Told you so.
Yeah.
But from Blazor client, if I understand it correctly, it's also maybe a good way because we haven't had any great candidates, I think, for replacing AngularJS.
No,
And it
So
would be really nice to have a C# code base instead of TypeScript, which is at least slightly better than the horrible JavaScript. So I think, I mean, if it proves itself to be a viable replacement for AngularJS in the coming 2 years or something, then that's nice. Let's see if it gets traction, because
yeah, we
maybe
shouldn't back it
Blazor
before.
client dies before it becomes viable. Who knows?
But I think it definitely will get traction because the programming model is so very much easier than anything else that has been out there to get data. If you have data, then they have all this problem where you get data from and how should you handle the state of this data. That's always a struggle for everyone. But if we just put that aside, this is very much easier than what they have tried before. And also it sort of rips off what React is doing in the client browser. React is like Facebook's framework that has been enormously popular. Everyone's using it. And they are basically doing exactly the same as these render fragments. They redo part of the DOM and they keep a virtual DOM behind the scenes, and then they diff with the real DOM, and then they do minimal changes to the real DOM, and that sort of makes the programming model for the developer can focus on a simple component. This component has this data in, and the result is this HTML. This data in, and the result is this HTML. And everything can be made very dynamic because a piece of data in and any HTML out. And that's the strategy behind a React component, and exact same strategy behind a Blazor component. Any data in, any HTML out. But of course, it's not obvious if that data in sort of is displayed in multiple places on the screen. Should you re-render the whole screen, or how will the different components know that one of the components got new data? And nothing of that is handled. So you still need to have this subscription mechanism. You need to have a good order on your view model so that you know that your derived stuff signals the right component, and everything that we do already is, as always, partly unsolved in all the other strategies on how to get data into the component engine.
So it's the Blazor client, or the Blazor thing is the last mile.
Yeah, as always. So
it's not the structured back end or the transformation engine from your domain model to the UI model. But I mean, it's the thing I've read, it feels like a good fit for that replacement, and it also would be nice then to have C# all the way.
Yeah.
And maybe then it's more reusable between, because of course there will be something after Blazor, and there will still be Windows VPF, and there will be all these other things, and this MAUI. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Yeah.
So
But,
thank you very much for participating this evening, and see you in 2 weeks.
yes.
Very good. Thanks, everyone.
You too.
Thanks.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.